Hey, what is going on, podcast people? My name is Tyler Bruner, and man, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Broadcast. It's a brand new Friday, and that means it's a brand new episode of your new favorite podcast. Man, this is 5 episodes. I can't believe that. 5 episodes. You know, I started out this podcast not thinking I'd make it to episode 5, but you know, we're just going to continue to do this crazy thing. We've got some awesome guests in the pipeline, and especially today's guest is so special. I had to record a new intro for the audio portion of this because I bought 2 championship belts, wrestling belts, and didn't care to explain what was going on the video side for the audio side. So here I am. If that doesn't tell you what today's or whose today's episode is, well, I'm just going to tell you. It's Mr. James Jeffries. He is the Impact Pro Wrestling World's Heavyweight Champion. And no, not that Impact. It is IPW, not TNA. Wrong brand. I know it's confusing a little bit. But it is the IPW World's Heavyweight Champion, James Jeffries. He's been their world champion for 2 years at this point, which I did not know coming into that. So Roman Reigns, if you're watching, you might want to watch out. You got some competition. Man, today's episode is such a special one. So if you enjoy conversations like the one we're going to have today, make sure you follow the podcast, leave a review, leave a rating, and of course, follow us on social media because we're just going to have bigger and better guests from here, and that can only be possible with your support. So do everything you can. Follow us on socials. Yes, follow the podcast on your preferred podcast platform. That is an option. It'll tell you when new episodes come out, which, by the way, are every single Friday. Man, so excited. Let's talk about today's guest a little bit further. Again, James Jeffries, IPW World's Heavyweight Champion. He's been Extreme Champion in IPW, Tag Team Champion. He's really done it all in IPW, and now he's helping the next generation of IPW wrestlers as a coach, which we'll talk about that. We'll talk about his love for the Von Erich family and wrestling growing up, how he took inspiration from the Von Erich family, and we even talk a little bit about how him and his wife met each other at the same wrestling school. Just some great conversations. And one other thing that's really cool about James and we actually have a little bit of a connection coming into this. We're from the same small town in Iowa, Riceville. I promise you probably have never heard of it. If you have, let me know because that's quite impressive. So we're from Riceville. My grandfather was his hunter safety course teacher. My mom was a substitute teacher for him, and his grandma was a tutor for me growing up. And plus, his grandma moved into the same apartments I lived in growing up as a kid. I mean, it was just destined that our paths were going to cross. But man, so excited for this episode, and I hope you are too. So let's just quit the talking and lay the smack down on this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of every single age, this is the IPW World's Heavyweight Champion. This is James Jeffries. Man, we got such a special guest here today. This is Mr. James Jeffries. He is the Impact Pro Wrestling Heavyweights Champion, World's Heavyweight Champion. I want to make sure I get that right because some people say world, other people say worlds. But James, man, what's going on? What's going on in your amazing world of pro wrestling?
Oh, just, we're kind of just getting fired up a little bit more here again, getting busier the last couple weeks. So I just did a show up in Algona for Absolute Pro Wrestling, and then before that we had an Impact Pro Wrestling show down here in Des Moines. And then this Saturday I'm going up to Faribault, Minnesota to wrestle. So things are picking up a little bit, and it's nice. It's nice to get out and see the fans and see some familiar faces. So
yeah, and what was that event like down in Des Moines? Because I saw the posters for the guys and the gals on that. So how was that event for you?
It was really cool. Like a couple of us joked, like, if you could imagine pro wrestling at Studio 54, I think it was kind of like a nightclub wrestling type of an atmosphere. They had music playing, kind of in the background at the same time the wrestling matches were happening, and we'd been down there. I think this is our third show we'd done there, but we were in Forte in Des Moines, right downtown. We were there for 7 years. So, and then when Forte closed down, it's still nice to go back to Des Moines to wrestle. So there's a lot of good wrestling history down there, and there's a lot of good wrestling fans down there too. So it was cool, good
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to preface this real quick before we start. You are IPW champion. You are not TNA champion. I wish you were. That'd be cool, but you're Impact Pro Wrestling champion. So there's just a little bit of difference there.
Yes, sir. Yep. Impact Pro Wrestling. I can remember when we were all sitting in a meeting in the locker room of Impact Pro Wrestling when TNA said they were going to change their name. So it's funny now that they're changing back to TNA, and also I just wanted to say too, Tyler, thanks for having me on tonight too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, we're doing this interview right around 7:30 at night, so we both were able to make this work. And I appreciate you making this work, man. You're pulling. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, you're a wrestler. You got a main job. I mean, you're doing all this stuff. You got a kid at home. I mean, so thank you
yep.
for making the time, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. I love doing these types of interviews, and it's always an honor for me to be asked to do a podcast, or to be asked to be talked to about my wrestling life. And yeah, I got a regular warehouse job, and my son is 2 years old, and my wife Nicole, she's a wrestler too. So um, it's been wrestling's been real good to me. So it's pretty fun to share it, and I don't know, it's just always cool when somebody asks to talk to you. So I feel very honored.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the cool thing, James, and for those listening, I mean, the cool thing about the connection between me and James is we both grew up in the same small town of Iowa. I learned a little bit right before the camera started rolling of the fact that my mom's substitute taught you. My grandpa, he was your hunting instructor. I mean, that's just a weird thing. So again, I'm going to ask you this while the cameras are on. I don't want to make you feel old, but now that we're kind of sitting here together, it must make you feel just a teensy bit old at this point.
It does. It does. I'm 35 years old, and I remember, Tyler, you were, I mean, I want to guess probably 3 or 4 last time I saw you. So it's really cool to see you're doing so well, and you do such a good job with the podcast. So I'm very, very happy for you. And it's nice to see a fellow Ricevillian, as they call it. But yeah, it's a pretty special place to grow up, and I was fortunate to wrestle there in our hometown twice. So it was, and I still go up every so often to hunt and then see some friends, and it's a very special place to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's talk about pro wrestling, man. I've got you here. Let's talk about your pro wrestling career because it's really taken you a long ways. You've been IPW champion for 2 years up until this point, and you've kind of run the gamut. I think, if I'm not mistaken from what I've heard, your career started late 2000s, early 2010s, and it really started to pick up with some tag team stuff with a run with the Extreme Championship. So talk about just your humble beginnings from small town Iowa to the squared circle.
okay, so yeah, I graduated from Riceville in 2007, and I watched wrestling with my dad growing up. A lot of the Attitude Era, and I remember a little bit of like what they call the Golden Era with Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan, Kerry Von Erich, all those guys. But just watched with my dad growing up, and then um, as you get to high school, I had always wanted to be a pro wrestler. And so I started looking into some wrestling schools, and I went to an independent wrestling show up in Rochester, and I met a guy named Baron Von Raschke, who is a legend, especially in this area of the Midwest. Wrestled for the AWA, and his list of credentials, amateur and professional, speak for themselves. But I had met the Baron, and I said, "Hey, how do you get into wrestling. I'd seen like Louisville, OVW had a school down there, and I wasn't so familiar with the independent wrestling. I thought, hey, you go to OVW and hopefully you make it through OVW and go right to WWE. I didn't know that there were these independent shows. So that was my first interaction with indie shows. And then after talking to the Baron, he goes, "Hey, give me your name and your phone number." And there's a guy named Brad Reinigans here in Minnesota. He's over in Japan right now, but I'll call Brad and try and get a hold of him. And I have your number. If I hear from him, I'll give you a call. And you know, I think maybe 2 weeks went by and I was out picking rock. We were talking about picking rock. It was one of the jobs up there in Riceville. I was out picking rock and I get back and my mom says, Baron Von Raschke called. And I go, no way. He called my house, talked to my mom. I called him back and he said, hey, I got Brad's address. Just write him a letter, tell him who you are. So I contacted Brad, and Brad wasn't training wrestlers anymore. So it's kind of a long story of a lot of moving pieces, but at least my introduction to pro wrestling. But Brad wasn't training anybody anymore. So Baron sent me down to Harley Race. And he said, hey, Harley's got a good school. Go down and talk to him. And so I went down, and I was pretty undersized at the time. And Harley was very nice to me, showed me around his school, said, hey, just give me a call when you put a little bit more size on, and I'd love to have you come down. So then, go back home, and a couple weeks after I went down to see Harley, there was a commercial on KIMT for a wrestling school out of Algona. So I saw the commercial, and then Harley was running in Waterloo. He was doing the Hall of Fame show at the time, for the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. He was running the shows and bringing in talent to wrestle on that. So I went down to watch the show, and then I see TS Aggressor, Travis Shillington, in the crowd. And I remembered him from the KIMT special. And I did not realize at the time that he wrestled for Harley, for years. And I talked to him, and he invited me over to Algona to check out their wrestling school. And this is kind of where, like, Baron Von Raschke, Brad Reinigans, Harley Race, and Travis tie together, because Travis, TS, was trained by Brad Reinigans. So I thought, man, this is really cool how, just through the same network of people that you end up getting an opportunity to train. And, I went over and met with Travis and another guy that was training with him at the time. They were training together, was Johnny Fitness. So TS Aggressor and Johnny Fitness are the guys that trained me to wrestle. So about 6 to 8 months, I was in my first match. So really, it happened pretty quick. And, just a wrestling school in Iowa, finding out that there was one here, and it was just a very Impact Pro Wrestling. Their training school was such a good school to be a part of. It just felt very welcoming, and they really wanted to teach wrestlers who had the same dreams that they did. So that's kind of how I got into it. Was you meet. It's just kind of a networking thing, So it's just kind of cool that way. And you mentioned like probably 2009, 2010. I got in a good tag team with a guy named the Big Picture, and um, I felt like we were kind of put together with no real idea at the time, but we had started kind of playing with different ideas. He was the bigger, stronger bad guy, and I was kind of the chicken bad guy. So I'd get the guys upset and run away, and big man, came in and cleaned up. So, but I really, really enjoyed being his partner. So and then, the Extreme Championship run too, like being in a team with Big Picture, and then the Extreme title run, when I beat Sparrow, was that I felt like that was my first big push. So you really wanted to prove and do well for the company.
Hey, what's going on, podcast peeps? It is Tyler Bruner, the host and creator of Beyond the Broadcast, and I am beyond happy that you are enjoying today's episode. And if you are, and if you want to see more of Beyond the Broadcast, of course, the easiest way to support us is by following us on your preferred podcast platform and following us on all of our social channels. You can find those in the description of today's episode. All right, we got some more lo-fi hip-hop and plenty of more Beyond the Broadcast coming up next. I do got to ask you, because I was listening to a previous interview you were in, and you had mentioned some of the extreme matches that you were in. I mean, you had triple threats and no DQs, but you also mentioned fans bring the weapons. What's one of the weirdest weapons that were amongst the crowd?
Oh gosh, somebody brought a vending machine made out of cardboard and pop cans. There was a guy that brought one of those. So that's one of the coolest and the weirdest ones. Goodness, they brought keyboards. Somebody brought a big bag of popcorn, a summer sausage. I mean, it seemed like anything they could find in their kitchen they were bringing. So, except for the kitchen sink, but yeah, just Guitar Hero guitars, stuff like that. And I remember the fans bring the weapons match. They had first kind of started as battle royals, like they'd be at the end of the show, and then they're like, okay, we're going to make this kind of a staple match of our extreme division. So, it was, they were fun and exciting, So,
and that's one of the most unique things I think about independent wrestling, is that they're not afraid to test out these ideas. I mean, you see some of the crazy, wacky stuff that happened in the 90s, contract on a pole match and all the crazy stuff that happened in WCW. But that is such the fun thing about independent wrestling, is that they're not afraid to try these new ideas. And if they fail, okay, cool, we're going to do something next week and try that out.
Exactly. Independents are just so fan friendly, I feel. And you notice too, a lot of these independents, they don't have guardrails. And that's one of the best things about the independents, is you can get up and talk to the wrestlers. It's kind of an intimate setting where it's just a fun atmosphere, yeah, like you said, if it doesn't work, they'll try something different, and sometimes if that one don't work, the next idea they try, I mean, they're like, oh, this is great. Why didn't we think of this years ago? Huh? Just wasn't the right time, I guess,
Right. I do got to ask you, with all this stuff, what was it that I was going to ask? I literally just had it. Oh, here it is. We're talking about independent wrestling, and I think people have in their minds what it's like nowadays. I mean, with AEW, with ROH, with MLW, all these independent shows now that have the presence and the showcase and all that stuff, they have it in their minds now. But when you started out, it was really difficult to get into indie wrestling and to even know what it was. You really had to seek it out. So what are the differences that you see between independent wrestling when you got into it and what it's like nowadays?
Yeah. So like when I got into it, you know, you'd kind of some guys will you do that independent wrestling stuff. This is 2007, 2008. There wasn't that many of them, and it was almost like they weren't really accepted. The independents were. Now, like I feel like 2015, 2016, like when you see a lot of these guys, from the indies like the ROH, MLW, they move up to NXT and then they move up to WWE. I feel like a lot of those indies, they became more accepted, and people are making their living on the independents, and they weren't so much snickered at anymore, if that makes sense. Like there's so many good independents, like GCW and MLW, Impact Pro Wrestling, ROH. Like there's there's really just so much wrestling nowadays that you can watch all the time. And a lot of the independents, I think, are doing real good, and I like them too because it seems like a lot of these independents, as you've seen, Tyler, they kind of have their different themes too, like Impact Pro Wrestling is a little more family friendly, and then GCW is a little bit more hardcore with a little bit of a ECW edge, so, ROH is traditional wrestling, and I mean, I think it's a pretty. I think it's been pretty fantastic to see how the independents have grown within the last 10, 15 years, because it's really helped a lot of wrestlers make a living in wrestling. So I
Yeah,
just,
I mean,
yeah, it's fantastic.
you talk about like the Matt Cardonas, you talk about um, the Flip Gordons of the world, the Young Bucks. I mean, these are guys that really got their start. I mean, even in your era, I mean, PWG and ROH were kind of the indie darlings, if you want to say. But I really love that it's the fact that it's taken more seriously now. I mean, you look at even the match that Will Ospreay had at Rev Pro recently. I mean, 6 stars by Dave Meltzer. That's nothing to bat an eye at. So, a lot of these wrestlers are finding ways to, like you said, to actually make a living off of this, and it's a living example that the independents were really in a very special era of pro wrestling.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of people are, saying that they're the new territories. You hear about territory wrestling. I think a lot of people are comparing the independents to territories, and I think it's fantastic. It's just more platforms, more eyes to see wrestling. And like even here in the states, it's grown, and it's growing, overseas too. So it's just keep growing independent wrestling. So there's a lot of good wrestlers that haven't been discovered. Will Ospreay. I mean, he's been discovered, but it'd be cool to see him in WWE. So
He's been kind of turning that question of is he not? Obviously, he's going to AEW at this point, but you never say never. I mean, you never know.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's great, that you have like an AEW or a New Japan or WWE. You got more places to go on that level. That's was something that was special uh, with the Monday Night Wars and WCW and WWE and ECW, is that you had different avenues, different type of product for each one. They offered something different. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Do got to talk about your awesome memorabilia you got on your back wall there. You got all the Von Erichs and Kerry Von Erich, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's so cool. I mean, I'm starting to grow my memorabilia. I've got 2 titles right there. Oh, is he gonna move the
yeah.
camera? Oh man,
I'm
we
gonna
got to see
move it
this.
just so I can show it to
Oh,
you.
this is awesome.
Now, can you see it
Yes,
very
we
well
can.
here?
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
So the top one in the middle right here, I have a friend named Rob Schamberger that does artwork. You've probably seen Tyler for
Uh huh.
WWE. He made that for me for Christmas, and then my friend Troy gave me a Kerry Von Erich autograph for Christmas a few years ago. Um, I got my buddy Justin gave me a clock. that's autographed with Carrie and Mike Von Erich. Uh, got a magazine and a picture from my friend Tim Larson, and Kyle Klingman gave me the magazine. And then there's
Oh
his
yeah.
WWF figure, and then that's just a custom one that I had made. Some of these um, some of these websites are doing a real good job with custom wrestling figures. And then this is one of his only more recent WWF figures. They made a Texas Tornado, a Kevin Von Erich, and then a Kerry Von Erich.
Uh-huh.
So that year he got two different uh, two different figures, but
Wow.
that's that's kind of my wall there. And then I got to show you the superstar,
Oh man, we're just
Billy
getting a whole
Graham.
tour. Oh, this is, oh my gosh.
I wish I had more to show you.
Superstar
Um,
Billy Graham.
can you see him at all up there?
Yes, we can. Wow.
I bought them two figures because I thought, they look pretty good. And then that's a Rob Schamberger watercolor as well.
Oh, that's so
So,
cool. Man, that's
so
so special. I mean, that is so cool. I mean, obviously, I mean, I think as yourself and your wife being a pro wrestler, but us being dudes, I think we're so used to having like the corner or the room, but it's so cool that you had that all displayed. And of course, one of your favorite family slash wrestlers, the Von Erichs. From what I heard, you got into the Von Erichs and their style and who they are a little bit later in life, because obviously when you started watching late 80s, early 90s, they were kind of just getting done with all their careers. So where did this love for the Von Erichs kind of come from?
So the love for the Von Erichs came from, my brothers Keith and Solomon and myself were amateur wrestlers, before I ever got into pro wrestling. So my dad used to take us to tournaments, and I read about, like, I had just a wrestling book with, it was like uh, history of pro wrestling, and it had various stories, about like Stone Cold and Hulk, and then it had something that said the tragedy of the Von Erichs, and it was these brothers that were all wrestlers that wanted to be like their dad, and my brothers and we wanted to be like our dad. That's why we wrestled. So that's kind of how it struck a chord with me was, hey, I got brothers. We wrestle. We wanted to be like our dad. The Von Erichs, brothers that wrestled, they wanted to be like their dad. So then I started researching them and just learning about more about their story. And I remember vaguely Carrie as Texas Tornado, but I didn't, I had to research him a lot more. But during that research, you find out about the Von Erichs and World Class Championship Wrestling, their promotion, and they ran such a good promotion that it seemed like, I don't know, it just had a really cool feel to it. It almost seemed like like a lot of these independents. It had a excitement and a life behind it. And of course, it's very tragic, that the brothers and, their father and their mother aren't here anymore. But really, I would just, look up their matches, on the internet and stuff at school. And, like Kerry Von Erich, he's my favorite. And I always thought it was cool how the fans reacted to Kerry and the Von Erichs, and how the Von Erichs reacted to their fans. It was a very genuine feel I felt. And I'm like, man, I want to be like those guys, because they took so much pride in wrestling, their family, and talking to their fans. And, I feel they really drew their style and their energy from the people. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, Tyler, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously apparent when people come up to an IPW show and they see your attire. Obviously, you take a lot of inspiration from the Von Erichs and from Kerry Von Erich. So, what other aspects from the Von Erichs do you take? Do you take some of the moves, some of their just charisma? What are some other aspects from Kerry or some of the other Von Erichs you incorporate into your own style of wrestling?
So, like, I use the discus punch, which was Kerry's uh, probably his signature move, because um, he qualified for the Olympics when they got boycotted, and his throw would have won the Olympics that year. But unfortunately, with the boycott, he didn't get to. He had his record was, you know, a huge leap better than the top guy in the Olympics at that time. But so he threw that discus punch in his matches, and I just always wanted to throw a discus punch like my hero. So I try and get that in my matches. The robe I wear to the ring, I copied from him. A lot of, like the tassels and stuff on my boots, like I tried to take a little bit from the Ultimate Warrior and take some from Kerry and a little bit from Billy Graham, because I got some tie dye stuff, and like when I was a heel, I'd wear the feather boas and, a little bit of pink and just tried to be flamboyant like the superstar. So I just wanted to wear a little bit and try and wrestle a little bit like all of them, like the Von Erichs in particular, they had such charisma that it's hard to replicate it, but I just always wanted to believe like they do, or they did.
Mm-hmm.
So but yeah, discus punch is one thing I could think of, tassels on the boots. It's just fighting back from underneath. The Von Erichs did that. Excuse me. Von Erichs did that a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Hey, let's talk about Impact Pro Wrestling. I mean, you have been with that company for so long. You've been tag champ, extreme champ. You've been world's heavyweight champ. What is it about Impact Pro Wrestling that is so special in your heart and in your eyes?
Um, they just really have always made me feel at home and really took good care of me over these years. Travis and Troy, the owners, they've been very good to me, giving me a lot of match opportunities, and I also really believe in the way they present wrestling, and it reminded me a lot of what I watched as a kid. So it was really easy to get behind both of them. And, Travis and Troy, they're lifelong wrestling fans, even to this day, and they've been involved in wrestling longer than I have, over 20 years. And um, it's really cool to see them get so excited on show days, and they genuinely care about each person that buys a ticket and wants them to be entertained. And Impact Pro Wrestling takes it seriously when you come to our shows. And I feel a lot of our wrestlers take it seriously. Like you could have done anything with your Saturday for entertainment. And you came to watch IPW wrestling, no matter where it is. So I just they've always taken real good care of me, and it's always felt like a family atmosphere for me, and that's what I enjoyed about it. Every wrestling dream I've had through Impact Pro Wrestling. So it just I don't think I think my wrestling dreams, and I think my story in wrestling would have been very different without Impact Pro Wrestling and Travis and Troy. So
Yeah, Absolutely. And the cool thing is, from the sounds of it, you're now kind of transitioning into a coaching role. So, what does the future of James Jeffries in pro wrestling kind of look like? I know that you're creeping up in age, and obviously you can't all. We all want to be Sting, but we can't be Sting.
Yep.
So what does the future look like for you? Is it coaching? Is it producing? What does it kind of look for you, man?
So for me, it would be coaching. My dream has changed. I had a few tryouts with WWE and, like OVW we mentioned earlier. I had a couple tryouts with them years ago. And those were great experiences. They were very good. It was a great learning process, but my dream shifted as the years have went on. And particularly when I started coaching wrestlers over at the Vault. Um, I just it makes me feel like I can relive it again through some of my students, and I enjoy it just as much watching them perform as going out there and performing. The only bummer about it is there's so many of them on the Impact Pro Wrestling shows now and other shows that I'm a part of, like Absolute Pro Wrestling. Some of my students were on the shows, and the only bummer is you can't watch each of their matches. You're always missing somebody. So I always kind of feel bad that way, because you want to be able to watch all their matches. But yeah, just the future for me is as a coach, as however I can help with Impact Pro Wrestling, or help out some of the students that I have. I guess I've had such a joy in the wrestling business, and I've enjoyed it so much. I met my wife. She went to the same training school as I did. A couple years later, met my wife. We have a son together. I named him Kerry after Kerry Von Erich. Um, my dreams were fulfilled a long time ago. So it's just any way I can help in a coaching aspect is how I'd like to keep going the rest of my wrestling days. And it's still fun to get in the ring, you know, uh, from time to time, and I still enjoy that. I still love seeing the fans, and I'm very proud of all the wrestling students that I've got to work with, and it really helped my longevity, I feel.
Hey, what's going on, podcast peeps? It is Tyler Bruner back hanging out with you once again. We've got another break here on the podcast, so make sure you get on up, you stretch your legs, get some of your favorite drinks, your favorite snacks, because we got plenty more Beyond the Broadcast coming up next. If you are enjoying this show, just make sure you follow us on your preferred podcast platform, because that's how we're going to grow the show. That's how we're going to get more guests, and it's just going to be a lot more awesome for many more episodes to come. Also, make sure you follow us, subscribe to our social channels. You can find those in the description of this episode. All right, we got some more lo-fi hip-hop and plenty more Beyond the Broadcast coming up next.
Yeah, are you wearing an Owen Hart shirt?
Yes, I am.
Is he your favorite, or
I've grown to love Owen Hart. He obviously was way past my time. I didn't start watching it until 2010.
that's cool?
But
That's cool.
yeah, I just got this t-shirt, and oh my god, it's so cool. I love it. It's got right down here, it's got the Owen Hart Foundation logo on the bottom, and then it says 1965 to forever. So I thought that's just a really cool detail.
Yeah, I love the colors too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love it.
I hadn't seen that shirt before, but he was fantastic. I got to see him wrestle one time when I was 10.
Oh wow.
Yeah, up in Minneapolis.
Okay. So
So,
was that the Blue Bomber gimmick?
so that was right before it. It
Okay.
was actually right before WrestleMania 14,
Okay.
when he was babyface getting ready to wrestle Triple H.
Okay.
And he wrestled. Some of the memories of it are kind of spotty as far as who the other guys wrestled, but Stone Cold wrestled Triple H. The Road Warriors were on it. they're my favorite tag team. So I had never seen them before, but they hadn't gone back on TV yet. So they came out in their helmets and stuff. It was like 2 weeks before WrestleMania, but I want to say Owen wrestled like, gosh, Road Dog or something like that in the
Uh-huh.
singles. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was cool. He's so good, and like his brother Brett's phenomenal too. But
Right.
I just thought Owen hit everything. He was a great bad guy, a great good guy. You know, Brett was such a good baby face that you always wanted to see him be baby face. Man, Owen was smooth. He was just real good.
I do got to ask you now that we're all back finally and all the stuff is working once again.
Yeah.
You grew up, I think, in one of the in one really awesome era of pro wrestling, the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars. What was one of your favorite moments from that era of wrestling?
So, you know, when Sting beat Hulk Hogan for the world's heavyweight title in WCW, I remember the buildup of the NWO is just beating everybody down, right? And Lex Luger beats Hulk Hogan, I think like a year and a half or so before that, but then loses right away. You know, the NWO had such a hold on WCW, and Sting would just keep coming down from the rafters and beating up the NWO. And then when he finally won, I can remember being real excited when he did beat Hulk. I also remember when Mick Foley won the world title from The Rock. That was pretty cool. I remember watching that live. Um, Gosh, it was such a good time, you know, and like a lot of the stuff that was maybe rated R of the Attitude Era, my dad would just say, "Hey, let's flip to WCW," you know, because you could program it, you know, with TBS and US or TNT and USA, and you could hit previous channel, you know. So if there was something too wild going on, he'd click to the other one. But and you know, Stone Cold, all his stuff with Vince McMahon and the Mike Tyson, you know, when he got in Mike Tyson's face, those are the ones that stick out just off the top of my head. So
Yeah, and you mentioned, I love that you mentioned the previous channel thing because I was just old enough that that cable was still in my life and I had an old bubble screen TV. And I used to do that too. I used to have the previous channel. Kids
yeah.
nowadays don't have that. And I think in some ways the, oh, did you see that last night? Is lost a little bit because social media, you can just pull up a clip and you can watch it and see these things. So I think in that way that the art of that of switching channels and switching between what nowadays would be WWE and AEW is lost a little bit with social media.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and also too, you'd have to tape a lot of the shows too. I can remember if we weren't home, setting up and recording the shows, but you had to pick one. Are you going to record WCW this week or WWE? And if it was a really good episode, I just kept it. Or, you know, you had to really pick if you were going to tape over it or not. So I think there's so many more platforms now to watch wrestling on, like you said, that yeah, it definitely, I think, makes you look back at those days with a fondness that, hey, I got to watch Raw or I got to watch WCW because something's always going to happen. It was such must see TV.
Yeah, absolutely. I do got to ask. I mean, you mentioned that you met your wife in pro wrestling, went to the same wrestling school. So, what was it? Was it love at first body slam? Was it? Did she put the sharpshooter in you, and you're like, yeah, I gotta marry her? What was that connection that kind of led to you guys meeting up?
It was love at first body slam for me, you know, and it was Nicole picking me up and slamming me, you know. So, um, but yeah, it was. She's been great. So it was definitely love at first sight for me, and I definitely found a very special person to share my life with, and you know, with my son, she keeps everything going for us. So she's fantastic.
Are you doing
It,
Sure, all right, sorry to cut you off there. Are you doing the same thing that your dad did with you? Are you watching pro wrestling with your son and kind of doing the same thing that you did with your dad at a young age?
A little bit, Carrie, he seems like, he's into like dinosaurs and other things. So he'll watch for a minute. My mom always likes to tell the story of my dad would sit me on his lap, and I've tried to do that with Carrie a few times, and he'll watch for a minute and then he'll go do something else. But if he's into it someday, great. If he's into something else, that's great too. Hopefully, someday he can watch matches of myself and his mother. We can share some with him, and say, hey, we did this once upon a time, I mean, but yeah, it's just, and then like when we take him to live events too, Tyler, um, I think the noise and the atmosphere kind of scares him a little bit. So, um, maybe someday, when he's a little older, he'll be able to see what's going on a little better.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Talking about wrestling nowadays, I mean, you have been through a lot of eras, a lot of dark points in wrestling too, the 2010s in particular. But I got to put it out there because that's when I got into it, and it was not the best part. But here I am, still a fan. I got to ask because we have really seen a big renaissance of pro wrestling. I think for the first time since the 90s, pro wrestling is cool again. You don't have to be afraid to be a pro wrestling fan. So, talking about pro wrestling and what it is today, what are some of your favorite wrestlers, favorite storylines that's going on? What are some of your favorite things about pro wrestling today?
today, I mean, I love the Bloodline storyline that they were doing a little while ago. Um, Goodness, I think the women's evolution over the years of so many female wrestlers are fantastic. So I mean, there's a lot of good storylines there, like with Becky Lynch. I really like how the Bailey, uh, what's the group name? It escapes me.
Damage
Damage
control.
Control. Yeah, Damage Control. I really like how that's played out because she caught him kind of like Batista caught Evolution back in the day, as far as, she heard him talking about her. And I think, that'll be a good matchup that she's in. So I really, really enjoy that. I'm trying to think what else. Those are two that really, off the top of my head, probably the Bailey angle right now. I enjoy the most. Just it'll be kind of neat to see how that plays out.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we're so close to Mania at this point. I'm of course going to be watching, keeping close eye. But
me too.
speaking about these larger than life people, I mean, you've had the chance to step into the ring with a couple of legends from throughout pro wrestling. A couple that come to mind. Number one, Austin Aries. You had a chance to wrestle him, and if I'm not mistaken, Hacksaw Jim Duggan as well at the Hall of Fame show. So talk to me about those two moments because you teamed up with Hacksaw, you wrestled Austin Aries, and those are two completely different people at two completely parts of their life.
Yeah, yeah. Hacksaw. I actually just saw Hacksaw down in St. Louis at the Missouri Athletic Club. I was down there wrestling for SICW. Um, Herb Simmons, his promotion. If you haven't seen his shows, he's got good wrestling down there. But I teamed with Hacksaw a couple times, and it's cool because I have his Hasbro action figure downstairs from when I was a kid, and you meet him, and he's super cool. Like he was a really really cool guy, and he was always having fun. Even when he was winding his career down, and I think he's such a good example of a wrestler and a good example of an ambassador of pro wrestling. And also, too, I watched a video with him recently that he said he's been with his wife for 40 years, put two daughters through college, like all from wrestling. So I just think he's a good human being. Yeah, Hacksaw is. And teaming it with him was great. It was myself, Jimmy Rockwell and Hacksaw Jim Duggan, two Jims and a James versus Team Canada, Matty Starr, Ryan Slade, and Devin Carter. So that was cool. And Austin Aries too. One thing I'll say about Austin is some of his first wrestling he did out of Minnesota was for Impact Pro Wrestling. And Austin Aries to me was always very nice, very helpful, always had time for me. Just I think he gets a bad rap sometimes because if you sit down and really talk to him, he's got some good stories, and I think he was one of my favorites, like when he was in WWE and even in TNA too, because Troy and Travis brought him in a few times, like when I was tag champ and extreme champ. So I had seen him, and he wrestled a few of my buddies. So I'd been around him a few times, and just like Hacksaw, you've been around them a few times, and they were always really cool to me. So I really liked wrestling Austin Aries. I think he's probably the best uh, pound for pound most talented wrestler I've ever wrestled. He was on the next level. So
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the one question that I love, there's a podcast guy called Chris Van Fleet who interviews a ton of pro wrestlers, and he was a big inspiration for me starting this. So, Chris, if you're watching, hey, what's up, buddy? So he asked the question, what is your Mount Rushmore of pro wrestlers? And that's so hard because there's 4 spots for people. I even have a hard time doing it. So who is on your Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling?
So for my Mount Rushmore, I would say Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold. Oh gosh.
It's that last one, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold. I want to put Bruno Sammartino in there just because I think he was very beloved, and just he had such a long title reign, and yeah, I'd put Bruno there. So yeah, how about you?
That is so hard. There's, I think, a lot of figures within pro wrestling that you look at that I think you have to look at through the lens of how did they evolve pro wrestling to the point of where it is today. So, you got to put Ric Flair on there. You have to put Hulk Hogan on there. I think those two are locks no matter what. And from there, I mean, you can throw almost anyone in there and it would make sense. I mean, Bruno Sammartino is one of those guys. Superstar Billy Graham can be one of those guys. Bret Hart, Stone Cold, The Rock, John Cena. It's those last two that I throw it up because, I mean, I grew up in an era where Super Cena was still happening. And so, he was kind of that next big guy. Some people nowadays would say Roman Reigns for the effect that he's had in this part of pro wrestling. So, and of course, there's one name that I think is hard to say at this point. I think the individual who helped put the WWF on the map, that name is hard to include at this point just because of everything going on. But that's a name that needs to be on there too, to a lot of people. But yeah, without Ric Flair, without Hulk Hogan, without maybe even Andre the Giant or Bruno Sammartino, or even Antonio Inoki. I mean, Antonio Inoki is one of those guys that wanted to try things to try to get stuff going. You could even say Roddy Piper. I mean, there's so many names you could throw on the wall like wet spaghetti and they would all stick.
Yes. Yep. They'd all fit perfectly in there. Gosh, you mentioned Andre. I'm like, well, yeah, duh, James. Andre would be, I mean, yeah, he would just be great. I mean, yeah, it's so hard. Isn't it so cool, Tyler, that there's so many characters, and like John Cena, there's such a fondness for these wrestlers that they're just I don't know, their body of work will live forever. And like John Cena too, I always think, so much that he does for kids and Make a Wish. He reminds me of the Hulkster. Like I just think I can remember when he was kind of rising. Like he was when I was in high school. He had just got done doing the rapping gimmick, and then he was world's champion, and I'm like, man, this guy is a big star. And he's looking for that Rock payday now. So
Yeah, he absolutely is. But I think on the same terms as what the Hulkster was in the '80s. He was that for the WWE during the 2010s, or the late 2000s. He really took on this role as an ambassador and someone who is so approachable and really speaks well for the brand and is a good introduction into pro wrestling. If you've never seen it before, I think a lot of people attached himself because he's this larger than life human. I mean, he's huge, and he's like what, almost 50?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he is. He's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to ask you this because we mentioned it before. I think you and I know what pick and rock is, but I don't know if anyone else outside of Iowa would know. Essentially, you go out in the fields and you pick up rocks so that the combines and stuff like that don't run over them. So I got to ask you, what is harder? Is it pro wrestling or is it pick and rock on a hot summer day?
Pick and rock on a hot summer day. So, and the summer times in Iowa get hot. So
They do. I don't think people understand how hot it can be, especially in Iowa. You don't got just the hotness, but you have the mugginess. That's what kills everyone.
yeah, and I don't know, like pick and rock, you'd pick it for 8 hours. I've never had an 8 hour wrestling match, so I wouldn't
That's
live
true.
through it.
That would be the ultimate Iron Man match if that's the case.
Yes, yes.
Oh man, let's wrap things up because man, I've almost taken an hour out of your night. So thank you for just being you and being so cool, man.
Oh, thank you. Anytime, anytime. I'm just I'm really honored that you asked me to be on your podcast, and yeah, I love talking about wrestling, and it's cool too, as you know, Tyler. You're a wrestling fan. I'm a wrestling fan, so it's nice to talk to a wrestling fan.
Yeah.
And chat about different wrestlers we like, and yeah, I'm happy to chat with you anytime because I really enjoy it.
Yeah, and
So
and I really hope this is the jumping off point so we can get more people from IPW and all these other independent places to just keep promoting independent wrestling because it's really an amazing thing, and especially in a day of nowadays of social media, it's so easy to go out and find these shows and attend these shows.
absolutely, and one aisle, you probably already know. Well, you do know about this one, Tyler, but the George Tragos Lou Thez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame weekend. It's the 25th anniversary this year. And if you haven't seen the lineup, stay tuned, but there's already been some pretty big names announced that are going to be there this year for the 25th. I believe it's the weekend of July 18th, 19th, and 20th. But there's a Impact Pro Wrestling independent show on that. It's just I think it's a bucket list for any wrestling fan. And um, if there's anybody listening out there, just the whole Hall of Fame weekend, they do autograph sessions, pro wrestling show, different podcasts, and all of the proceeds go to the Dan Gable Museum, a nonprofit, and they help a lot of families, in this area. So, definitely check that out. So
Well, I'm gonna have to try to make it up for that weekend because that just sounds like so much fun, man.
you should, and another one too, Tyler. Herb Simmons has a thing called Fan Fest down in St. Louis. I think it's May 18th. But it's SICW Wrestling, and I'm gonna be down there wrestling. And there's a lot of legends coming to that for a fan fest. They also do a wrestling show and they do inductions. So that's close by you, and that'd be one for somebody to check out too, because Herb does a real good job with with that whole weekend. And the state of Missouri, just going back to the Von Erichs came up to Missouri a lot, and there's a lot of really good history of wrestling in Missouri. Central States, and you get Harley Race down there, Bob Geigel, and so many others. But it's we live in a pretty good hotbed of pro wrestling with a lot of very good indies and very good wrestling shows.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, absolutely. So what's coming up next for Impact Pro Wrestling? What's that next show you guys for coming up for Impact Pro Wrestling?
So as far as next show for Impact Pro Wrestling goes, I want to say we don't have anything until May or summertime. We get pretty busy in the summertime with a lot of county fairs. So, and I'm sure they'll be announcing those dates, late spring, early summer. There'll be a ton of Impact Pro Wrestling shows coming to different county fairs around the Iowa area. So definitely check that out. And if you're able to make it, they're a good time. So I
Yeah.
definitely recommend them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one last question before we let you go. And again, this has
Yeah.
been this has been a bucket list thing. And again, I'm really hoping that we get a lot more IPW wrestlers on the show and a lot more of other independent wrestlers on the show. But
Yeah.
last question for you. Of course, this whole show is about going beyond, above and beyond in life and doing all these really cool things. So what are some reasons that you go above and beyond in your own personal life?
Um, just I want to do a good job for my son, and from a personal level, I just want to do everything I can to be a good father and also be a good husband to my wife Nicole. So just trying to be a good husband and father, but also in wrestling, um, I have such a love for it that I would like to leave it a little better than I found it and be a positive memory for somebody. And hopefully I can inspire somebody through my wrestling or my interactions, what have you. Hopefully I can inspire somebody to be a wrestler, just like a lot of wrestlers inspired me. I just think, I just think to put your best foot out there, you got to really believe in what you're doing and believe in yourself. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one question did come to mind. I didn't ask you about this, but you
yeah.
you started wrestling and started getting in the ring. What was one of the hardest lessons that you learned starting wrestling or even up till today? What's been one of those harder lessons you've learned inside the squared circle?
So Travis TS Aggressor told me you'll get into this or you'll get out of this what you put into it. And also, hey, you have to believe when you go out there and it's go time, you have to believe, and that's especially hard when you're new. You have to believe when you go through the curtain that you know what you're doing. You have to be able to think. I mean, just on the fly with a lot of things in dangerous situations, in situations you've been in 100 times before, but just a lot of the wrestling side of it. It was so much more than a physical. You had to really always be thinking. But those are two that come to mind. You have to believe in yourself, and you will get out of this what you put into it. And that's something I think you always got to keep in the back of your mind in wrestling. That hey, why am I right here? You know, you have to look at the avenues that you've taken to get there. You know, and how has it helped you grow? So, um, but yeah, it just yeah, those are a couple I could think of.
Because I think there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, I want to be a pro wrestler. And then they hit the ropes for the first time, and then they take
Yeah.
their first bump, and then they learn, like you said, the deeper psychology behind that. And they're like, yeah, this ain't for me.
Yeah, yeah. And Tyler, I mean, it's just we tell new wrestlers all the time, you have to be honest with yourself. at every level of this, and especially on the physical side. It is a physical business, and it's hard on your body, it's hard on your mind. But you have to find your way in it, and you have to find your niche in wrestling. And that may not be on Monday Night Raw. You know, it may be here or here. You know, like, I think you'll find your avenue. You just have to persevere, but you have to be realistic with yourself, you know? So it's, but also too, if you really want to do it, really stick with it, because it's going to take time. You don't want to finish wrestling, or I think anything, in a sprint. It's a marathon, especially the wrestling business, you know, and you got to capitalize on it when you get the opportunities.
Yeah,
So.
That's really well said. I love that, man. James Jeffries, IPW champion. My friend, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tyler. Thank you for having me. And it was good chatting with you. And it's an honor to be on your show. And anytime you want to talk wrestling again, I'm happy to do so. And you do a fantastic job with these interviews. So keep up the good work. And I hope to see you at one of these shows.
Oh, best believe I'm going to make it up. I'm going to do my absolute best to make it up for that Hall of Fame weekend, because I've been to one show in my entire life. That was Title Tuesday, AEW, Adam Copeland's debut, and that's been it. And so I really want to get out to these shows. And like I said, I want to meet all the wrestlers at IPW. I am so excited, and I want to be there. I'm going to be there. I'm going to make my way up there.
Good. We'd love to have you. So just, keep that weekend in mind. We'd love to see you there, and it's a blast.
Perfect. James Jeffries, IPW champion. Hey, man, thank you so much for being here on the show.
Thank you, Tyler. Take care, man.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. That was IPW World's Heavyweight Champion. It is James Jeffries. I won't let you hear that announcer voice from me ever again. That was not the best one I could have done in the intro. But man, James, such an incredible human being. And I think that's part of the reason why I started to go into the professional wrestling route, right? Got a lot of inspiration from Chris Van Fleet. He's half the reason why I'm sitting here nowadays doing this podcast, because I submitted a question to his Ask CVV episode. He got it answered, and I'm like, well, okay, now I almost have to do this podcast. So really lit the fire underneath me, but he really said something cool. If you really want to start interviewing wrestlers, you want to interview Stone Cold Steve Austin, you want to interview, The Rock, and all these big names in pro wrestling or movies or whatever, you got to start small. You got to start where I'm starting, kind of from the bottom. You get a hold of someone who knows someone who knows someone, and you never know where that's going to lead you. And funny enough, that's going to lead me to probably the coolest episode to date on Beyond the Broadcast, and that's coming up 2 weeks from now. Oops, I just hit the microphone. 2 weeks from now will be, I think, one of the coolest conversations I've had so far with one of the most unique individuals so far on the show. I'm so excited for that episode. I was so nervous for it. I don't think I've been that nervous for an interview like that since, oh gosh, probably since the first time I was in radio broadcasting as like an actual professional doing it. It's such a fun interview. I'm not going to spoil who it is quite yet, because I want that mysterious allure. But let's just say this. Let's give a little bit of a teaser. This individual was in a recent movie. Was in a recent wrestling movie. Might have heard of it. I'm not going to say which one. But he played, I would say, a pivotal part in that movie. Not only just on screen, but off the screen as well. I'm not going to spoil who it is, but I'm so excited for y'all to hear that conversation. And to give some context real quick on this episode, Joe Pecoraro was supposed to be on this episode. Scheduling conflicts happened, and thus we got James Jeffries a week early. So here we are. We had James Jeffries, and now we'll have Mr. Joe Pecoraro on next week. So excited for him. It's going to be a different vibe of the show. Love doing the interviews, love doing what we're doing right now on the show, but we're going to do just a little bit of talk radio on this next one. Joe and I bonded a lot through pro wrestling. I worked at the place I am now, and he was there for a few months before he moved on and now is working at McKendree University. I'm excited for this conversation. We're going to talk pro wrestling, we're going to talk sports, and you're going to find out real quick he has this niche knowledge about knowing exactly what conference a D1 school was in or is in right now. And I'm going to try to stump him. I wasn't successful the first time I saw him last time, but we're going to try to stump him this time. So if there's a niche D1 college that you know of that you think Joe might not know what conference they play in, submit them in the comments. I would love to know what niche D1 school you know that Joe might not know what conference they play in. So I'm so excited for that episode. Of course, 2 weeks from now, we get such a special episode. And if there's an independent wrestler that I should be talking to, let me know, man. I already got a lot of really awesome contacts from James that, of course, we're going to be talking to on the show. I got a few more in mind I'm going to try to reach out to. And, of course, I don't want to forget this. Please, if you can, make it up to Waterloo, Iowa for that awesome Hall of Fame weekend. Once again, it's the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame induction weekend. It's a whole weekend of awesomeness. They got a banquet. They've got a big old convention type vibe. IPW is going to be there. James Jeffries is going to be wrestling there. And it's all connected to the Dan Gable Museum, and all the proceeds go to that museum. It's such a really cool event that I'm excited to be a part of. I got to buy my tickets still. I'm kind of in a little bit of a money crunch, but that's okay. I'm going to try to make it. I'm going to be there. No matter what it is, I'm going to make it up there to that Hall of Fame weekend, and I hope to see you there too. Such an interesting combination of amateur wrestling and pro wrestling, and it's going to be a great weekend. So we hope to see you in Waterloo, July 18th through the 20th, again for the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame induction weekend. Man, that is a mouthful, but it's going to be such a fun event. Hope to see you there. And, of course, I hope to see you next week. Again, we got Joe Pecoraro. We're talking pro wrestling. We're talking the road to WrestleMania. We're talking college sports. Man, it's going to be a great time. My name is Tyler Bruner. Be great, be awesome, but don't forget to go beyond. And, hey, we will catch you next time, next Friday on Beyond the Broadcast. We'll see you later, podcast peeps.